are back, mystery lovers, pill seekers, and conspiratorialists all across the fruited plain. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live through my new microphone.
Paperweight.
Yeah, we won't talk about that. So where were we?
Well, I don't know where you were going. No, you were going to Ethiopia.
Oh, that's right. We ended with the
Elephantine.
Close the gap with the Elephantine Temple.
That's right.
Okay. So I want to take a step back for a minute here and then because I failed to do this on the last episode, and I think we should just give this overview of the Templars themselves. So founded in 1119, official recognition 1128, Synod of Troy. They fell Friday the 13th, October 1307. So when this happened, what happened was Pope Clement V basically sent out a
Papal
something, but it was secret, basically. But he sent it to all the kings of France, England, Spain, Germany, Italy, Cyprus, Scotland, and other places. Anywhere he had sway, with orders to, on October the 13th, Friday of 1307, to suddenly and without warning round up every Templar that they could find. And in France, 15,000 men were rounded up by the end of the day. And over the next year, they were tortured horribly and accused of all kinds of ridiculous things. And then eventually most of them were burned at the stake.
Yeah. Accused of worshiping Baphomet.
Yeah. And various other ridiculous things. But and including the burning at the stake was the Grand Master at the time, Jacques de Molay, which is, I think, how you say it. He was a French guy, and he was definitely burned at the stake. And there's a whole bunch of conspiracy stuff that goes along with the ending of the Templars, but the king of France at the time, Philip something?
Unknown.
He was, he really, what he wanted, and he went and met with the Pope, and there were other things going back and forth, but basically this king of France wanted to destroy the Templars in his country, and what he really wanted was their wealth and their properties. He had enormous debt to them. Okay. Yeah, King Philip of France. So by the end of the day, basically, they basically just split up. Philip got all their wealth, raided all their places, their temples and everything, got all the freaking... And what I want to point out, because people talk about how, the Templars were greedy and, they had these banks, and so Philip goes and just takes all their wealth or whatever. But what he's really actually doing is stealing the money from everybody who had deposited money in the Templar banks, right?
Yeah.
But he does not care. Like, most monarchs, there are very few monarchs give a crap about that. So if you had deposited money in a Templar bank, you were SOL. Philip took it as though it belonged to the Templars and then divided up all their lands and their wealth, quote unquote, their wealth, even though it actually belonged to who knows how many tens of thousands of people, because they had deposited in their banks as being really safe thing to do with your money. So he bankrupted and destroyed the economy of, he bankrupted who knows how many people and basically just devastated the economy of France at the time and just divided up all the wealth between the noble people, which is where he really thought it belonged.
Yeah.
Okay. So I find that whole part of the story to be just absolutely despicable. Not necessarily because, in part because of him thinking he could steal money from the Templars, but really what was happening is he was stealing money from everybody who had deposited money in their banks. And I just find that to be particularly grating.
Yeah.
So, but two interesting things. One is that in Scotland, Robert the Bruce, who was king of Scotland at the time, didn't really care. He was busy fighting the war against England, which he won later at the Battle of Bannockburn, right?
Yeah.
Isn't this the
This is after Braveheart, right?
right?
Like
yeah.
the whole
I don't want to lose heart.
Yes.
That guy.
Yes. After William Wallace died, or was like Robert the Bruce in the Braveheart story, like Robert the Bruce takes part in this betrayal.
Yeah.
He's being counseled by his father.
Yeah, the
because
leprous.
his father's like, hey, you can gain power if you go through with this because England's gonna win, and
Yeah.
so he basically, against his better judgment, goes along with the plan to betray, the ultimate freedom fighter,
William Wallace.
And then after that happens, he realizes like that was stupid.
Yeah.
Screw you, father.
Yeah.
And then he turns around and becomes the.
I want to fight as he did.
That's right.
What did he say? My son?
That changed his life basically. Like because
that betrayal was awful.
all leading up to it, he kind of like whenever he would hang out with William Wallace, he would just be like, man, like he's right.
Yeah.
But then he would hang out with all the nobles, and then they would convince him that this was a bad choice.
Yeah.
This is bad. But so he was being pulled in all different directions, and finally, after the betrayal and after he watched what William Wallace went through, he was just like, screw it, man.
Yeah.
Screw those people.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Right.
And he became their new leader.
Right. And he won
That's
the
right.
Battle of Bannockburn and defeated the English so soundly that that it secured his country's
They won
freedom
their
for
freedom, yeah.
hundreds of years. So what's fascinating is that all that was happening at the same time the Templars were being destroyed everywhere else in Europe. Number one, he didn't really care, right? He was a Catholic, quote unquote good Catholic. So it seems like he made a token effort. He arrested 2 Templar knights. He basically went to their house and was like, come on, guys, let's go downtown.
Yeah.
And let's have a chat. And they went downtown and he was like, you guys worshiping Satan? And they're like, no. And he's like, okay, get out of here. Basically, it was just like he didn't do anything to them. But then what's interesting is that he seems to have secured their assistance, major assistance, in the Battle of Bannockburn, because there are historical references to a large contingent of knights fighting behind the banner of the Equal Armed Cross at the Battle of Bannockburn. Right? So they knew by the time the battle occurred that their brothers had been devastated, and
They were like, we better fight for freedom right now.
Right. And so he was like, look, they're arresting you all over the country. Here's the letter. He probably showed it to him. I'm just guessing. He probably showed it to him, and he was like, help me fight. And they're
Yes.
like, okay.
Yeah. Oh, man. Sequel. Come on.
Yeah. So the Templars seem to have helped, and they won. And it was not too long after that. I can't say exactly when. I don't have the dates in front of me, but not too long after that Robert the Bruce himself began he started the Scottish Freemasonry.
Scottish Rite. Yeah.
Right. What's now known as the ancient Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Okay. So, and he was a Freemason himself. So I find that fascinating because there's this connection between, and so in somewhere else, I can't remember what it was. It was Portugal? Maybe it was Portugal. Portugal was the other place where the reigning person at the time, the king, I can't remember if it was a king or whatever, whoever it was at the time, they weren't really concerned with they didn't really do anything to
The decree.
right, with the Templars there. And so those Templars became the Knights of Christ. Okay. So from this point in the book forward, Graham is looking for what were the Knights of Christ doing, because what's fascinating is like all of the earliest forays of European interests into Ethiopia from 1300 AD forward, after the fall of the Knights Templar, were Portuguese. Okay. And remember that Portuguese were doing massive exploring of the ancient world. Not of the ancient world, I'm sorry. They were involved in the age of exploration. The Portuguese were at the forefront of the age of exploration all over the place. Right. which is why in a lot of places in South America, Portuguese is still spoken there because they were the first to like set up colonies. Right.
Huh.
So
Didn't know that.
Yeah. So I find all that to be fascinating. So Graham finds out that these Portuguese knights, that these Portuguese were going into Ethiopia looking, quote unquote, for the source of the Nile, right? And that every time he traced him back, he found out, oh, this guy was a knight of Christ. Oh, this guy was also a knight of Christ. So like Vasco da Gama, knight of Christ, right? It's all these people that were famous
For searching for the source of the Nile.
Yeah. And they were also looking for someone called Prester John, which is there's a whole section in the book about Prester John. And that's one of those more, I've seen the thing referenced and that there's this sort of a historical mystery on what or who was Prester John. And it's basically like when you look into it, you discover that, okay, a lot of these European powers suddenly became, I don't know if enamored is the right word, but they suddenly became aware so basically a letter was received by a whole bunch of European powers that was said to have been sent by somebody named Prester John, who was a quote unquote Christian monarch or emperor or something. He ruled a country and he was Christian. And the letter itself was just bragging about it. And he was not an European power. So they were all of a sudden like, wait a minute. There's somewhere in India or possibly in Africa, there's a Christian nation. And when you read the letter, it's just full of crazy claims that they have dragons and sea serpents and like that they have like 50,000 chariots and they're carried by enormous tusked, like elephants basically. But you go through it and it's like a lot of it seems to be like, r/I am very badass, right? It's just like a whole bunch of bullshit. But there's this fascinating little, let's see, where is it? I got it in here. Yeah, so page 11. There's a fascinating passage in it that led Graham Hancock to think to maybe perhaps understand who this was coming from. So one of the parts of the letter says, "We have 42 castles, which are the strongest and most beautiful in the world, and many men to defend them, with 10,000 knights, 6,000 crossbowmen, 15,000 archers, and 40,000 troopers. Whenever we go to war, know that in front of us there march 40,000 clerics and an equal number of knights." Right? It's just like, I am very badass, right? "Then come 200,000 men on foot, not counting the wagons with provisions, and the elephants and camels and everything else which carry arms and ammunition." Right? So Graham says this is unmistakably fighting talk. But what was most notable about it was that what was closely tied to something else, specific and hostile mention of the Templars. In a section apparently intended for the, quote, King of France, the letter suggested, "There are Frenchmen among you, of your lineage and from your retinue, who hold with the Saracens. You confide in them and you trust in them that they should and will help you, but they are false and treacherous. May you be brave and of great courage, and pray, do not forget to put to death those treacherous Templars," says it directly in the letter. So from this, Graham dates the letter and figures out this is coming from Harbe, who is Lalibella's evil stepbrother, who took the throne when Lalibela should have been ruling. So it seems clear. So
Lalibela was
the Ethiopian king who went to Jerusalem. So he was in exile. So it seems clear that the Templars at this time were already in Ethiopia looking for the Ark of the Covenant, and Harbe hated them. They were powerful. And so he sends this Prester John letter to all the European powers and just talks about how amazingly awesome it is, and then also says, but you should kill all those Templars because they're assholes.
Yeah.
Right. So that doesn't work for him because Lalibela eventually returns to Ethiopia with Templars and they take over from his brother, and Lalibela is triumphant. Lalibela, quote unquote, commissions the temples to be built, the churches, and the Templars just cut them right out of the rock with their lightsaber shamir.
Yeah.
And then carve the secret of the shamir and the construction of the temples onto a big pillar, which is kept covered in cloth even to this day, and no one can see it. temples, there are 9 of them, one for each of the founders.
Yeah.
And they are all monolithic, and they are all connected to each other by an enormous labyrinth of catacombs and tunnels beneath the solid stone of the mountain, which is volcanic rock, by the way, basaltic.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So that's where we are with. So remember the story of Lalibela. So that letter was what led Graham to think, okay, wait a minute, Prester John is Harbe. And he tries to figure out, what is this Prester John title? And he realizes that John, Jan, was a prefix that all the Ethiopian monarchs would assume, sort of like Sir.
Yeah.
John, Jan, right? And Prester was because all of the monarchs also were, quote unquote, initiated into the rites of priests. So they were John priests, Prester, John. So you get the syntax wrong, you mix it up, and you get Prester John, and then you Europeanize it or Englishize it. And instead of, Preste John, you get Prester John. John. Right, yeah. So some etymological stuff there.
Yeah. That's crazy.
So there's the riddle of Prester John. And there's a whole bunch of it in the book because it takes Graham a long time to untangle this mess because the whole mystery of Prester John is just as wrapped up in smoke and strangeness as the whole thing with the Comte, what's his name? The guy who supposedly lived forever, Saint Germain.
Saint Germain.
Yeah. So let's see, where are we going from here? What time we got? Okay. So at this point, we've figured out that the Templars had gotten into Ethiopia. They had helped Lalibela take his throne back, and now they have access to the Ark. We read a few things, or I mentioned a few times that there was an Armenian that came and was actually shown the Ark, and at the time when he was there, which is before the Templars were destroyed, he said that the actual Ark of the Covenant was brought out 4 different times a year in these enormous ceremonies, and that it was carried by 4 white men wearing the equal arm cross that had red and gold hair, right? So
now, is this at the time after the papal decree or whatever?
No, this is still before that.
Okay.
Right. So the papal decree comes, it's about like 130 years.
I knew you were giving just a sort of synopsis of the Templars there, but I just wasn't sure like where we are in the
Right. So Lalibela stuff happens while they're still in Jerusalem. And they got kicked out of Jerusalem within 70 years of going there or so, because that's when the Crusaders lost the city again. Right. So the Templars actually get into Ethiopia with Lalibela soon, within a few decades of their formation.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I just want to say there's this interesting part about Moses, like just going back again to the significance of Ethiopia in all of this. Like, why Ethiopia? There's the whole, Queen of Sheba deal. But way prior to that, when Moses gets basically flees Egypt because he kills the guard or whatever.
Yeah.
He ends up going to Ethiopia to escape. Like, that's the first place he goes. And when he arrives there, there's this king, King Kikanos, Kikanos. And he's like, they're laying siege to some city. They're in the middle of a war. And Moses goes there and helps him and befriends the king, and the king loves him and makes him commander-in-chief of the army while they're sieging the city.
Wow.
And then they're doing this for like 9 years. And then the king gets sick and dies. And the people, like the whole army and everybody, like they start freaking out. Like, if they find out that we've lost our king and we don't have, we're separated from our homeland or whatever.
Yeah.
Then, they're going to take advantage of that or something. So they end up basically picking a king, and they pick Moses. And then he's 27 at the time, right? 27. And he ends up...
I'm 27, I'm not old.
72 backwards?
Yeah,
Just saying.
That's right.
he ends up being king of Ethiopia for 40 years. And then at that time, they basically, some other political stuff is going on, but everybody loves him, right? But they decide that one of the king's heirs, the King Kakanos guy, he has an heir. And
Too young at the time, but...
Yeah, 40 years later,
Yeah.
he's like ready to go. So they end up crowning him, and then like they're like, but we're not going to kill you, dude. We're just taking your crown. And here's a whole bunch of gifts, and thanks a lot for being an awesome king.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and he's like, all right, cool. I never wanted to be king anyway.
I'm out.
So he failed.
Fine. I didn't want to be king anyway.
But it was like, okay, so when I learned that, I was just like, dude, this is... So, once again, this magician guy who knows all the secrets of Egypt goes into Ethiopia and reigns as king for 40 years. So right there, you have embedded in...
He fucking reigns as the king.
Yeah, in their culture is like all of this, esoteric knowledge from Egypt.
Yeah. Wow.
Already in Ethiopia. So it's almost like, and then they marry him to one of the,
Oh, yeah.
like a princess or something.
I wonder if that's
there.
where Sarah came from. It wasn't Moses.
No, it wasn't Sarah.
Okay.
Sarah was
later.
Yeah. But like in other words, there's precedent for later on the Ark going there. Like this would be like a sort of, they're sort of like secret allies.
Right. Yeah. Return to the secret kingdom of your secret king.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's crazy. I wonder how. Well, that's really cool. Okay, so what I want to go to next here is
And the watcher says the source of the Blue Nile is Ethiopia.
Yeah, so we talked about that in the last show too. Following the Nile from Egypt, going up towards the source of it. Remember, I was saying like after Elephantine,
it splits or whatever.
Well, that they seem to have gotten in the habit of let's build our temples on small islands and water sources.
Right.
So they followed the Nile into Ethiopia, except that they went up the Blue Nile, not the other one that everyone thought was the source for a long time. The Blue Nile goes up to Lake Tana.
That's right.
In Abyssinia.
Right. And there's a bunch of islands in there. That's right.
Right. And Lake Tana is the source, or well, the
flooding of the Nile.
rainy season in the highlands in Abyssinia that flood the Lake Tana and then dump all that water down the Nile every season is the source of the Nile flooding in Egypt, which allows it to have any agriculture at all. So Graham comes across this really interesting thing that while Lalibela was king in Ethiopia, he seems to have looked into a project to divert the waters.
That's right.
Of the Nile into quote unquote mines. Now think about that.
To screw over Egypt.
Right. Why would you do mines? I'm thinking like, okay, you want to divert water, just sort of like make some canals going off the side or whatever. But no, like because you have the Shamir, you can just dig enormous holes in the ground, So the Templars are like, yeah, we can make these mines. And then when the water starts to flood, it just gets shunted into these underground passageways. And that screws over the Egyptians and like destroys their agriculture. And at the time, the Templars, the other Templars, not the ones that were in Ethiopia, but the rest of their brotherhood were fighting enormous wars in Egypt trying to take it over. They had obviously decided that Egypt was the next place to go. So if you think about the first 9 guys go to Jerusalem, they dig under there, they find whatever they find, the Joachim and Boaz and all the secrets therein, right? They trace the Ark to Ethiopia. They help Lalibela. First they're trying to get it from, but Harbe hates them. He's trying to get the French all the European powers to destroy them. Then they help Lalibela take his throne. They build a bunch of cathedrals there and everything like that. Now they've got campaigns in Egypt to take over Egypt, and they've got the Ark in Ethiopia. So now they have the secrets they found beneath the temple, and they have the Ark of the Covenant, and now they're after Egypt. These guys were going after every pyramid in the world, right?
Holy crap.
They were stopped, though. Lalibela never seems to have followed through on the whole Nile divert the waters into the mines project. And then the Templars were defeated and destroyed and went underground all over the world. So I want to get to,
probably became the Masons.
Right. So I want to get to this part. Okay. So this is from the book, Sign and the Seal. Graham is feeling pessimistic. I was now feeling extremely pessimistic about the prospect of ever breaking this research deadlock. Nevertheless, I telephoned Richard Pankhurst in Addis Ababa, which is a Ethiopian historical scholar that he's been dealing with, who has been helping him a lot throughout the entire book, and asked him if there were any records which might suggest that there had been any contacts of any kind between Ethiopians and Europeans during the periods in question. Well, none that I know of before 1300, he replied. And how about after 1300? I suppose the first documented European contact was with the Portuguese embassy that arrived in Ethiopia in 1520? Well, not quite. A small number of missions traveled in the other direction before that, I mean from Ethiopia to Europe. As it happens, the very first of these was sent within a century of Lalibella's death. So that does put it into the period you're interested in. I sat forward in my chair. Do you happen to know the exact date? Well, yes, I do, Richard replied. It was 1306. 1 year before they were destroyed in 1307. And it was quite a large mission. It was sent by the Emperor Wedim Arad, and it had, I believe, about 30 members. Do you remember what the purpose of this mission was? Well, I'm not absolutely certain. You would have to check the source, but I do know that its destination was Avignon in the south of France. So
This is where that guy comes from, probably, right? The builder design guy.
Oh, no, that's not Clairvaux.
Oh, okay.
Dang it. The point is that in 1306, 1 year before the famous 1307, October the 13th, Friday the 13th, destruction of the Templars, an enormous, and this is after Lalibella's death, about 100 years later, okay?
Yeah.
So his son had taken the crown. So what Graham eventually figures out is Lalibella's son takes the throne, and then that guy's son takes the throne, and then that guy abdicates to an heir that is quote unquote Solomonic by way of Menelik. Then a delegation of 30 diplomats go from Ethiopia to France and have a whole bunch of meetings with the Pope and King Philip. And then less than a year later, the Templars are eradicated.
Okay, so the Solomonic bloodline
wanted them out of Ethiopia.
Yeah. Holy crap.
So I found that to be really compelling. Now, obviously, that's a sort of like, correlation is not causation, right?
Yeah.
Just because this happened before this happened doesn't mean that those two things are connected, but it's...
Yeah. Pretty suggestive.
Right. So you think about it, this new monarch who is a completely different, is not from the family of Lalibela, takes the throne, and now he's got this militant...
But he's also from the families, like the great patriarchs that created the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
So that's interesting.
Right. But the Templars don't seem to have been doing anything negative in Ethiopia. It's just he just suddenly is like, I don't like you. Lalibela had given them... And then his successors had given them access to the Ark, and they were, by all apparent, but basically the evidence looks at it like they were great allies. That no one was pissing anybody off. Yeah. This guy just takes over and decides he doesn't like that. I don't know. To me, it's typical monarchian bullshit. He doesn't want this foreign power and maybe he could just send a bunch of guys over there to eradicate them, but he knows that there's tens of thousands of them from all over the world that could just come swarming into his country to
support. It doesn't even have to be that, though. I mean, he's a descendant of Solomon.
Yeah.
That was...
Well, that's the claim, that he's a descendant of Menelik, but that's the claim, right? It's so far away from that now.
If that's what he believed, my point is that's all he needed. Like, if these people were over there and having access and doing stuff with his, they're very protective of the patriarchy and everything that they do.
Yeah.
Nobody else is allowed to have that artifact.
Yeah. But remember, these guys are Christian. They're not the Jews. But they had converted, and it's really convoluted. The Jews, the Falashas, have long had lost control of the Ark.
Yeah.
So
just saying. Bloodline of Moses.
Yeah. So that's really interesting that it isn't the Europeans that first go to Ethiopia diplomatically. It's actually the first, like you said in there, the first delegation, the first contact with European powers in sort of medieval, like late medieval times, and Ethiopia is in 1520, which is the Portuguese. No, the Ethiopians send an enormous delegation in the other direction in 1306.
Yeah.
So, and they seem to have caused the destruction of the Templars all over Europe. So, before we get to the break, there's one more thing here I want to read. So Graham dug this up. This is from the 1800s or so. Baron Karl von Hund, a German Mason high up in the Masonic order, said, this is a quote from him, "Freemasonry originated in Knight Templary, and that, in consequence, every Mason is a Templar."
And we're back. Final segment of part 2. The Sign and the Seal. And the search for the Ark of the Covenant.
That's right.
Deep into the mysterious orders of people throughout our history that are protecting, concealing, preserving, and seeking knowledge.
Yeah. So, one thing I wanted to point out, because I find this fascinating, is that when the Templar Order was destroyed all over Europe, at the time, the Templars had an enormous fleet of ships. And even though over 15,000 Templars were rounded up all throughout France and many, many more throughout the rest of Europe, the Templar fleet, which was in one of the French harbors at the time, I'm pretty sure. When this happened and they were all being arrested, the Templar fleet sailed away and disappeared without a trace and was never seen again. So, I mean, you could assume, that sounds really mysterious and cool, but you could assume that once they got out where they were away from everybody, they took down all their banners and changed all their clothes, and then you could go back and sail into any port and no one maybe would know.
Yeah.
But that fascinates me.
Be pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
In those ports, a
Yeah.
lot of those people would recognize the ship anyway. And
Yeah. Are you a Templar? No.
oh, we no.
Yeah. So I find that to be fascinating, and I started to think that I wonder if they got ancient maps out of Yakim and Boaz as well.
Yeah.
Because there's the whole Oak Island mystery, which seems to be, although some people think the Templars did it to hide the Ark of the Covenant itself. Now, I don't think that. I do believe it's in Ethiopia, but the Oak Island mystery is interesting, and the fleet disappears. So what if they just said, screw it? They're killing us all over the known world. We have these maps that show us there's another one on the other side of the world. Let's go there.
Yeah.
Anyway, the connection to Oak Island is interesting, and maybe we can get Scott Walter on here one day and talk to him about that, because he's done a lot of research on that stuff.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. History Shift, get on that, buddy. I know you talk to Scott all the time. Get us on the show. Get him on the show. So one other thing I wanted to mention, and I know we're jumping around here, but I had forgotten about this from the last one. This one should have been in the last show, but let's see. It's on page 380. Our two other artifacts. Okay, so after the return from Babylon, it was so the once Nebuchadnezzar raided Israel and raided the temple, they took everyone pretty much. They took basically all the Hebrews. They took them into Babylon and kept them there as slaves. They basically lived outside the city and they were used as slaves for a long time. And then eventually Nebuchadnezzar was, or maybe it was down the line, I don't know if it was him himself or one of his progeny, but they were deposed and someone else took over. And that guy was a reformer king. Or maybe they were conquered by someone else. I'm not sure. I can't remember the story exactly. But basically what ends up happening is all the Hebrews were given everything that still existed in the treasuries. They were given all their artifacts back and they said, go back to your country.
Yeah.
You don't have to stay here. And after that, they were still under the rule of that distant country, but in a much more benign fashion. Right?
Yeah.
They were still considered conquered, but they were returned to their land with all of their stuff and their history and their religious artifacts and told to just go back, do your thing, but pay us tribute or something.
Yeah. Don't try to kill us.
Right. So after the return from Babylon, it was impossible to disguise the fact that the precious relic of the ark had gone and that it therefore could not be installed in the inner sanctum of the second temple. This great change was explicitly admitted in the Talmud, which stated, in 5 things the first sanctuary differed from the second: the ark cover, the cherubim, the fire, and the Urim and Thummim. The Urim and Thummim had been mysterious objects here referred to collectively as a single object that had possibly been used for divining and that had been kept in the breastplate of the high priest at the time of Moses. They were not present in the second temple, neither was the celestial fire that had always been associated with the Ark of the Covenant. And of course, the Ark itself was also missing, together with its thick golden cover and the 2 golden cherubim that had been mounted upon it. So the reason I wanted to mention that is because it's possible that these 2 things were also hidden beneath the Shatia, the foundation stone, with the pillars.
Yeah.
And the various other accoutrements of the Holy of Holies. But what fascinates me about those 2 objects is they're quote unquote used for divination and were part of the armor breastplate. Right. And then you get to this whole like Joseph Smith thing where he's able to put on this vestment.
Yeah.
And then he's able to translate any language that he looks at.
Yeah. The Sayer's stones.
Right. So you think of the Urim and Thummim as being a seer's or sayer's stones. That's basically what they're described as.
Oh, dude. That was the other thing. In that temple that Solomon found in the desert, where they told him that there was a door on the western side, blah, 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 and he went through there. He found this, the thing that had all the writing on it, that had the message, was a massive, like, it was made of silver. Basically, it was metal pages.
Oh,
but it was
a metal library.
Yeah.
Wow. The Pillars of Enoch. So anyway, yeah.
The metal pages that Joseph Smith finds, and it comes with like the vestment or whatever it is that he puts on, or the way they describe it as the Sayer stones, translates it for him. Yeah, it's just
right. So these objects used for quote unquote divination, for seeing. Like, the idea is that when wearing them, you can read in true any script or any type of attempt at communication, So imagine that. Like, we have all these translations of these ancient texts today. You put this thing on, and you're not getting it translated like where you're trying to read it and it doesn't make any sense.
Google Translate.
Right. It doesn't do that. You actually can read it as well as the person who wrote the stuff, or better. Like, you get the true meaning that's being attempted to be conveyed, whether it's images or pictograms or any kind of attempt at communication.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I just find that to be fascinating that it's a...
And if they had that and ancient maps, done.
Right. So yeah, I wanted to throw that in there, that there were these other 2 objects that also disappeared and were not returned with the second temple after they left Babylon.
Yeah. I find the Robert the Bruce part of the story extremely interesting. Like, didn't he travel? Like,
Yeah, so let's get back to Robert the Bruce. He basically starts the Freemasonry in Scotland.
Right.
But it's his descendant, whose name was something else. It was not Robert. Man, I just forgot. Jamie. I think it was James Bruce.
yeah,
Right. So it was his descendant, and he was one of the searchers of the source of the Nile guys.
right.
So James Bruce does all this, and he was described as being this enormous guy, right? As in like a giant. He was like
Yeah.
incredibly tall, broad, and just, Scottish Highlander warrior guy. But he was. I find these connections to the idea of people searching for the source of the Nile, and then you start finding out, well, they were all like Knights of Christ or Freemasons from Scotland of some kind or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you get all the way up to like when we had Walter Bosley on.
Yeah.
You got Sir Richard Francis Burton doing the same thing, going to look for the quote unquote source of the Nile.
Yep. Yeah, that was crazy too.
Yeah. And he was recruited by a Hermetic order of some kind. And I'm like, okay, they were the Templars,
Yep.
hidden in this cadre of Freemasons at Oxford,
Yeah.
right? They're still looking. They're still trying to
And he seemed to get his hands on some ancient document that's
Yeah.
like talking about all this
Right.
stuff, and he's like, yeah.
Right.
And all of the
Like,
other
in other
scholars
words,
at
his-
the time are just like,
Right. His travels to find the source of the Nile was the beginning of what ended up with him down in South America.
right.
The Templar are still trying to regain the Ark.
Yeah.
Okay. So Robert the Bruce doesn't do all that
I
traveling.
mean, you
but
look
it's
at
James
South,
Bruce.
You look at South America, and you're like, like Brenner, Shimmer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty much.
All the temples and everything down there, you're just like, Shammer. So, yeah, James Bruce did a whole bunch of traveling, and he was a meticulous, just like Burton, right? These guys were meticulous documenters. They wrote everything, and when Graham was going through and reading all of James Bruce's stuff, he was he was researching other historians who have also read James Bruce's stuff, and they were all very impressed with how truthful, how well he described things.
Yeah.
He was very frank. He didn't make things up. But when it came to the stuff he was doing in and around the Nile / Ethiopia or whatever, he started to kind of be a little bit of a bullshitter,
Yeah.
right? And it's because he was trying to hide.
I also wouldn't be surprised to find out that the East India Company has like deep
Right.
ties with the
Yeah.
Masons.
Yeah.
But this
So-
makes so much sense. Like,
So when Graham goes to look for, one of the things he'll do is if he finds out that somebody is involved in some of the stuff, he's like, do you perhaps know where they might be buried? Right. And he wants to go because he can't find the guys. He goes to James Bruce's mansion, his old place of residence, and he finds out that it's completely gone except for a stairway, right? A grand stairway. And basically the guy who bought James Bruce's property knocked down all the old castle stuff, but the stairway was still intact. And so he left it there, and then he built the entire new house around the stairway because it was so awesome, right?
wow.
Yeah. And so the guy who owns the property at the
Kind of a jerk, but
yeah,
okay,
pretty cool.
that's cool.
That's all right. Yeah. You left your freaking stairs there. So the guy who owns the place, he's like, yeah, of course I'm very interested in James Bruce, but I'm no expert. And then Graham asks him like, well, do you happen to know where he might be buried? And the guy's like, oh yeah, he's buried over near this place or whatever, but you'll have a hard time finding it because there was a great giant obelisk over his tomb, but it was taken down because it was made of iron and it was rusting and it was deemed to be a danger to passersby. And
One
Graham Hancock is like,
of the pillars.
an obelisk? Hold on a second. So then he goes to the gravesite and goes all over and he's up and down and he's looking at names and he doesn't ever find it. And then he finds this, like, there's a big tree or something and there's like a sort of what he calls a trash bin, a trash heap. And he goes in and he's stomping down like vines and stuff that is all grown, stickers and everything. And then he finds 3 slabs of stone and he wipes them off, and he figures out that this is where James Bruce is buried, and it like actually he says a lump built up in his throat, that here's this guy and here's where he's buried, and he was so great, massive explorer, did all this stuff for history and everything, and he's just completely forgotten, and his grave has been covered in trash and weeds, and basically the people who are taking care of the cemetery are pulling up vines and weeds and then throwing them on this trash pile on top of this guy's place of rest. So he gets all pissed off, and he hops the fence instead of going back to the entire cemetery, and he hops the fence and he almost trips over an enormous obelisk laying on the ground. That's been completely restored and recoded, and he's able to read the inscription, and it's like, James Bruce, blah, blah, blah. He was this and that, and he was awesome, and he was badass, and he was super awesome, and he did a bunch of secret shit. And Graham's like, whoa. So then he is able to go to the people who are taking care of the cemetery, and he's like, who is doing the restoration of the obelisk thing? And they direct him to a guy, and he goes to speak to that guy, and he's like a minor lord, or he's a baron or something like that.
Yeah.
So he gets a meeting with this dude, and he gets into that guy's house, and the guy's like, I can give you 15 minutes. And Graham's like, 15 minutes is all I need. So they go in there, and the guy's like, okay, out with it. And then Graham's like, so James Bruce. And then the guy just talks for the next hour and 15 minutes and starts showing him all this stuff. And he's like, I have his sextant and his compass and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, I can get them for you. Hold on. Right? And so like, he's like obviously a huge, like he loves James Bruce, and he's well versed in his history. So finally, the guy looks at his watch. He's like, oh, dear, you'll have to leave. Perhaps you can come back later. And Graham's like, okay, just I have one more question. Is there any chance at all that James might have been a Freemason? And he says the guy looks like slightly startled, and he goes, my dear boy, of course he was a Freemason. And Graham's like, yes! Because he was unable to find out up until that point if James Bruce had actually been a Freemason. But this guy is like, he's like stunned that Graham didn't know that. Of course he was a Freemason. It was a very important part of his life. And he's like, oh, okay, great. So that, leads him to believe. Now he understands that being a Freemason, his whole thing with the Nile was actually not looking for the source, because at that time the source was well known.
Yeah.
There's no reason to go look for the source of the Nile. He's like, yes, I'm searching for the source of the Nile. But no, he was going up the Blue Nile to get to Lake Tarna. He's looking for the Ark. He's in Ethiopia. And he tells a bunch of fibs about how he had it directly from the king of Ethiopia's mouth that the Ark is long gone and is no longer resides there or whatever. And Graham is like, that's bullshit, because at the time the king there used it in ceremonies and would never have said that, really. So the guy was he was
disguising,
just throwing people off the trail. Yeah. No, I wasn't looking for the Ark. But and the king told me he wasn't even there. So, I mean.
Yep. Same thing that Burton did.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fascinating. Mm.
So one other part here that I wanted to check. This is another really funny part of the book that I just wanted to get in here. 389. When he goes to try to find out, this is more of Graham getting into interesting situations. Is this right? Oh, yeah. So he's trying to find out what modern archaeology has been done at the Temple Mount. Remember, so we talked about how modern archaeologists found the Templar Tunnel, right?
Yeah.
So now he wants to find out if anything else happened. So he goes to this guy, and he's like, says to him, since modern archaeology emerged, he told me bluntly, no effort has been made to dig inside the Temple Mount. Why? I asked. Because it's the ultimate sacred site. The Muslim authorities are utterly opposed to any kind of scientific investigations being undertaken there. It would be the worst kind of sacrilege from their point of view, so the Temple Mount remains a riddle for archaeology. Most of what we know about it is theoretical and interpretive. Archaeologically, we only have the findings of Charles Warren and Parker, of course. He actually did dig inside the Dome of the Rock in 1910, if I remember correctly, but he wasn't an archaeologist. He was a lunatic. He was looking for the Ark of the Covenant. And Graham says, I was not sure from this statement whether Barkai had described Parker as a lunatic because he had looked for the Ark, or whether he had looked for the Ark because he had been a lunatic, or whether his lunacy had been manifestly apparent before he had started to dig inside the Dome of the Rock. This, however, seemed like an excellent opportunity to refrain from mentioning that I, too, was looking for the ark. So yeah, that guy did actually, he got tricked by some seer, some psychic who was like, I know exactly where the Ark of the Covenant is. And he organized all these people, got all this money from donations, over 100,000 pounds at the time, and went to Jerusalem and did all these secret digs and then paid off authorities and got into the Dome of the Rock and down into the Well of Souls and started hitting at it with picks and stuff down in the Well of Souls. And then they got busted by some other guard, who freaked out, and they all started to run. And so that guy was crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And he managed to escape.
Yeah,
even though they busted him down in the Well of Souls, digging at the floor with a pick and stuff, they actually managed to escape, which is nuts. Everybody else who was involved with that got put to death, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing we're going to go through here are some of and Kyle was talking about this last time a bit, but the traditions that are in Ethiopia to this day regarding the Ark itself.
Yeah.
When Graham goes there, they have these enormous festivals, but there's one major one called Kimtot. I think it's called that.
I can't remember.
Basically, where this is one of the festivals where one of the remaining festivals from more ancient times, where supposedly the Ark is brought out and carried around in procession, and everybody goes behind it, right?
And they wrap it in burlap to protect the laity from it.
That's right, to protect the laity from it. So Graham goes to one of these, and he's not able to get into Aksum at the time, which is where the guardian of the Ark has his temple with the Ark in it. He is able to go to Gondarat, I think is what it's called, nearby, right? So he's able to go there, and he knows that he's not going to be seeing any actual Ark of the Covenant, but he's interested in these things called tabots that they call tabotot. The tabot is the singular, tabotot is the plural of these objects, and they seem to be in some way or another replicas of the tablets of stone that are supposedly kept within the Ark. So
yeah, but some of them are made of wood and
right,
various different things. But
yeah, others are made of stone. But he's fascinated by them, and he's trying to, in his search for the Ark, he's like, okay, these things are said to be replicas of the Ark, but he knows that they're not. They're replicas of what's inside the Ark, right?
Right, they're replicas of the Covenant.
Right.
Not the Ark of it.
Tabotot. But there's a really funny thing where he basically he gets involved in this enormous procession because he starts out at the place and the priests come out and they've got the things over their shoulder carrying it like Moses was said to when he came down the mountain, right? Mm-hmm. They're all covered obviously with various decorated things, and there's other priests around them carrying quote unquote umbrellas that have stars and moons and various other astrological symbols all over them and little tassels dangling, and they're all, and then they start walking and people are in front of them dancing and playing instruments and behind them, and the procession is enormous. And as they pass more temples and churches, other priests come out of those with their tabots and join the other priests until it becomes where you've got like 30 tabots and priests carrying them in their enormous procession and all the freaking people all in front and behind and everything. And they make this sort of symbolic journey all along up to the lake, which is nearby, a pond or a lake, whatever nearby. It's symbolizing the journey up the Nile to Lake Tarna, right? So then Graham follows this thing the whole way, and he's just pushing through all these people and trying to keep his eye on the brocaded cloth with the gold and red and everything, and the little umbrellas, that he can see sticking above the heads of the crowds of the priests. And he's like, and they get up to the temple, and the temple where the priests all go inside and they're continuing a ceremony, and he manages, he gets up there and he's sort of shy about it. He's like, I don't want to, he's surrounded by all these Ethiopians that are celebrating this thing, and he stands out like a sore thumb, and he's just like, But he says a small child comes out of the temple, takes his hand and leads him up there. They open the doors for him and he goes inside. They give him a censer, one of the incredibly old incense burning things, and beneath it it's got a little container where they put some sort of metal discs, so when you shake it goes shh, right?
Yeah.
And there's all these people in there, and they're chanting and swaying and doing this stuff, and he gets into it. They put him in the circle with all these priests and other people, and they've got the drum going on. I can't remember the name of the drum. Some ancient African tradition or whatever, and the guy's on the drum, and there's smoke all over the place, and he's getting high from it and everything in there, and they're swaying back and forth in the chanting, and he gets really into it. And they just totally accept him into their ceremony, and they're all smiling at him, and they're just like, they love the fact that he's there and he's taking part. Right. So the next part, I was just like, God, Graham, you're such an asshole. After all that happens, and they've just like embraced him into their, and brought him into the temple, into like one of the most, obviously he's not in the Holy of Holies, but he's right next to it. Okay. He saw the priests go in and like part the curtains into the Holy of Holies carrying the tablets, and they take them in there. And after this long thing or whatever, he's sitting there, and he's giving his his incense thing back to somebody, and he kind of keeps like sidling over towards that curtain until he's right next to it, and he like reaches out and he puts his hand on it, and he's like looking around, and there's people looking at him. He starts to pull it back, and they just all freaking tackle him and drag him away from it. And he's like, "No, I must see the ark." He says like 6 young deacons of the church have to like beat him down to the ground. They get him all the way down on the ground, and they're kicking him and punching him and stuff. And they stand him up, and he like brushes them off, and then they beat him up again. And then they pick him up, and one of them goes up to him. He's like, "You're a bad man." And then they throw him out of the church. Just get out of here. He's like, "Ah! Damn it." I'm like, God, Graham, they weren't carrying the real ark, not even the real tablets of stone. And you were just going to bust into their Holy of Holies after they accepted. God, what an asshole. But, I understand, I guess. He had to try.
Yeah, because it's just...
Go for it. Yeah. I just love how he sidles up and he's like, puts his hand on there, and before he can even pull the curtain apart, they're just like, bam! All of them tackle him, dude. And I don't know why I gave him the voice of Jafar there, but that's just, give me the lamp! That's how I view it. So in the end, this story seems to be, overall, that the Ark is in Ethiopia. It was eventually taken from the ancient Jews there by the Christian faction. And the Christians have it to this day. The Falashas have, for the most part, all immigrated back to Israel to get away from all the various wars that are happening there. So they have gone back to Jerusalem under the law of return, for the most part. At the time that Graham was writing this book, which was in the late 80s, there were very few Falashas left in Ethiopia. So the Ark is there. The Christians still have it. The Templars seem to have found something beneath the Temple Mount. They existed for 200 years and completely and totally blew the minds of most of Europe with their new Gothic architecture. They built temples all over the place. They started an international banking system. They became incredibly wealthy. They tried to take over Egypt. They went into Ethiopia and got their hands on the Ark, built enormous megalithic stone temples there. Monolithic, sorry. They may have found the Shamir. They were destroyed by the Europeans. They became in some way the Knights of the Masons, and there is probably a core
the Knights of Christ.
Right, the Knights of Christ in Portugal, the Masons in Scotland, and the Masons are now worldwide and probably merged with the Knights of Christ at some point.
And the Masons have this same sort of, biblical sort of Christian tradition behind their
Yes,
their
and they have Joachim and Boaz pillars figure bigly in their in their ceremonies for becoming a master mason.
One of the requirements is that you like to become a master mason, which is like basically the first stage.
Right. Become a master mason, which is level 3.
Yeah. Is that you have to believe in God
of a kind.
It doesn't specify religion.
You have to
Basically,
believe that the universe is not an accident,
like
basically.
creator God.
Right. So the Templars seem to have become the Masons, and I would suspect that there is a core of Knights Templary deep within the Masonic order that actually keeps themselves secret from the greater Masonic order itself. That's what I would say.
Possibly.
That's how I view
And
it.
the Watcher's pointing out the Shriners are Masons, by the way. Yeah.
Fez?
So I've heard and talking to some people who have close family members or had close family members who were Masons that basically at level 32, in order to, which is kind of like the only exoteric, that's the highest sort of exoteric level, but that a member at level 32 refused to become level 33 because they refused to become one of the Shriners.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Right. It's also possible that level 0 is 1 and 32 is the highest, and that would be 33 levels. That somebody who is not a Mason at all is the first level.
Yeah,
And
maybe
32
so.
is the highest. I don't know. I thought of that before.
I'm just repeating what I was told.
Digitally,
So.
you know, if you're talking about computers, from 0 to 32 is 33 numbers, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just find that incredibly fascinating.
Right.
Because I've always wondered about the Masons and wondered, you know, about the sort of impetus for getting the order. You know, we've talked about how they originally were actual Masons. Mm-hmm. I mean, this, you know, lines up with all of that very well. You know, that you could say, well, we were originally all Masons.
Yeah.
Because you were, you know.
Shamir.
Yeah, Shamir.
Right.
Nine
Where did the
guys with
idea
Shamir.
where did the idea from changing it from Templars to Masons come from? Well, because you had the Shamir. And anyone with the Shamir is a badass Mason, even if they suck.
Occasionally, there's still a Monday morning block.
Yeah.
A Johnson block.
This is Johnson block.
But for the most part.
But one of the things that fascinated me about this entire story is think about the enormous movements of people and nations and rise and falls of enormous amounts of things because of one artifact.
Yeah, I know. That's when we were having a discussion about this throughout the week, which we do often on these types of rabbit holes. It just struck me, and I know this is nerdy, but it's like we are living in that sort of like Harry Potter fantasy world.
Oh yeah, that's
like,
right.
Okay, there's, you know, the Deathly Hallows. There's these 3 artifacts in that world.
Yeah.
That they could trace those artifacts just by looking at characters throughout history and
The death and destruction and rise and fall
stuff.
of, yeah.
To trace through their historical documents where these artifacts were and who had found them and what they were doing with them.
Yeah.
Right? Even though most people didn't even believe they really existed or that they actually had any power. It's all
Yeah.
mythology, man.
Yeah. Bunch
But
of
no,
legends. Yeah.
we live in that world.
Yeah. We
That
actually
story is like a takeoff of the real world.
Yeah.
Where we have these ancient artifacts that you can trace throughout history and see all the death and destruction and amazing stuff that happens surrounding them.
Yeah.
And that's just mind blowing to me. I'm
Yeah.
just like,
that is totally awesome. It is the real world Deathly Hallows.
Okay, one more thing about fictional stories or stories about things told in a new way.
Old story told in a new
Old story told in a new way. So obviously, Star Wars. I'm referring to Star Wars.
Lucas's famous comment
Yeah.
when he was like, "Well, so are you?" I mean, this seems like a very old story. He's like, "Well, I wanted to tell an old story in a new way." So,
Let's see if I have this written down.
lightsaber is a Shamir. Just saying.
Okay. At the youthful age of 12, Solomon succeeded his father David as king. His real name was Jedidiah.
Oh, yes. Of course.
Jedidiah.
Jedi.
Jedidiah. The, quote, friend of God. That's what that word means.
And that's probably a not a corruption, but a sort of a Hebrewized whatever of the Jedi pillar.
The Jed pillar.
Yeah.
But it was superseded by the name Solomon on account of the peace that prevailed throughout the realm during his reign. He bore 3 other names besides Ben, Jake, and Ithiel.
Ithiel means something of God.
That's right. He was called Ben because he was the builder of the temple.
Wow.
Bran the builder, anyone? Jake, because he was the ruler of the world. And I looked that one up. Couldn't find anything specific about that symbolism. And Ithiel, because God was with him. So I just thought that it's like looking at these stories, like, okay, so you don't know this, but Benjamin the Builder that's Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay.
Like he was this ancient character who built all these. He built the wall. He built all these freaking castles and all this crazy stuff because he had the Shamir.
Right. Had the Shamir. Wow.
So yeah, Solomon is the Jedi. He is the builder.
Man,
You know,
he is
he's the
wizard.
ruler of the world. He is the wizard.
And God is with him.
That's right. He carries the ark.
Right.
So
End of show. End
No.
of show.
all right, so y'all can you can get a hold of us at the Great Pyramid in Egypt. That's where we're going.
Man, this was a great story.
Fantastic. Send us an email, brothersoftheserpent at gmail.com. Visit the website, brothersoftheserpent.com.
It's been
Russ
revamped.
it.
That's right.
It's way better. And for those of you who have friends that don't use podcast apps and you're trying to share the show with those people, it's easier for them to play the episodes from the website on their computers or phones.
Right. There are buttons there now that basically say listen on Google Podcasts or listen on Apple Podcasts. So if they go to the website from their phone, they can click whichever one applies if they're on iPhone or an Android. And it will actually just take them directly to their default podcast app on their phone. Even if they've never used it, it just automatically opens it with the Snake Bros podcast opened up in it, and they can subscribe and start listening. So
We are officially getting spam on the comment sections of our website. So if you guys
moving
want
up
to
in the
go,
world.
if you guys want to go out spam the spammers, please do. Check out the Encyclopedia while you're there, the glossary of terms. And
Follow us on Twitter at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS. I'm very active on Twitter and having a lot of fun there.
Yeah, look at the snake skins
Yep.
on the website. Share the
right.
shows.
Snake Skins is our merchandise store. Buy yourself a t-shirt or a pillow.
If you don't want a t-shirt, donate to our pyramid scheme.
That's right.
A massive scheme to send us straight to pyramids with your donations.
That's right.
Thank you to everyone who has donated.
Yeah, thank you guys so
and
much.
please, if you donate and you have time, comment.
And we will read it on the
we love the pyramid scheme comments.
Yeah, that's right. They're fantastic.
But thanks to all of you who don't make comments too.
Yeah.
Totally acceptable.
And you can send me comments on Twitter if you prefer to do it that way. I have read a few of people's conversations with me in DMs on Twitter, like Rabbit Hole Warrior from last week, who has sent me some more stuff, which I'm going to probably read on the next show. So give us reviews if you can. Go to anywhere you can give us reviews. iTunes is the preferred one, but we're all over the place. If you want to find a place to give us reviews, just search Brothers of the Serpent in your preferred search website, Google, DuckDuckGo, whatever you use, Yahoo. And you can find us on Player FM. You can find us on Podbean. Any place where you can give us reviews, that helps a lot. Thank you guys so much. And we also like to read the review comments if you leave one. So,
And support our sponsors.
yeah.
Send an email to acousticpanelingsolutions@gmail.com if you are interested in getting beautiful, awesome acoustic panels for your podcast studio or your recording studio or your living room, wherever.
Yeah.
They're awesome. Send old Kmart an email, tell them you heard about him on Snake Bros, and work out the details. He's got a beautiful product there.
Yeah. And also History Shift. You can follow him on Twitter at History Shift. You can find him on YouTube, History Shift. He has been making all of our YouTube videos by taking our podcasts and the pictures that we use in the to put on the show notes, and he turns them into videos on YouTube, and that has been awesome. We've got tons of subscribers on YouTube now, and people are commenting on the shows on YouTube, and that's really great. So follow him on Twitter at History Shift, or find him on YouTube there, and you can find us also to just search for us or him on YouTube, and you can find us. Also, he is still doing dolmen searching and megalith searching and
Sasquatch running.
right, running from Sam Squanch in Montana. He made the mistake of thinking that the Snake Bros Snake Forest did not know what they were doing when they did their own Sasquatch calls, and he played them when he was in the middle of nowhere, and now Sam Squanch is chasing him all over Montana. So go help him not die from Sam Squanch. If you want to get a hold of him, if you live anywhere near the area and you want to go on some hikes with him, he has been finding some amazing stuff. He also has a blog about it, which you can find at historyshift.blogspot.com.
And thank all of you listeners so much. We love you.
We love you very
doing this,
much.
and it's a lot of fun.
Yep.
You guys make it worth it. So
Yeah. Deathly Hallows.